whether you're in California, whether you live in LA, whether you live in Boise, if you're looking for any sort of racial discrimination or the negative impact of living in such a homogenous area, I feel like you can find that anywhere too. And you can find that here.
Today we are exploring the experience of minority families living in Idaho. Idaho is not the most diverse state in the US by any means. As a non-minority person, I understand that these concerns may be different for a minority family, and that's why today I have my good friend Jacob Shin here, and we're going to talk about what his experience is like moving from California to Idaho. So through his story, I hope to provide a better understanding of what it would be like to live in Idaho as a minority family and to help others who may be considering moving here. So everybody, this is Jacob Shin. He is a friend of mine. We go to the same church. That's how we met each other. And he's got a similar story to a lot of you. He relocated from California 2 years ago?
2 years ago. Yep.
2 years ago. And I recently got a call from one of my viewers. Thank you for that call. And he asked me, he said, hey, like, Craig, be honest with me. I'm a minority. I want to move to Idaho, or I'm considering moving to Idaho, and it looks really white. And he is absolutely right in that judgment of Idaho. Idaho is one of the least diverse states in the nation. It is above 90% Caucasian. And so a lot of you guys have that question of like, what will it be like for me? So that's what we're talking about today. It's just Jacob's experience. There's probably a ton of different experiences that people have when they move to Idaho. Before I even ask you some questions, we were just talking before we hit the record button. Tell me some things you're thinking about. Like, even as we talk about this subject of race and diversity in Idaho. And...
It's a complicated question because specifically as a Californian or as a ex-Californian, California is a huge state.
Yeah.
The city of LA has 10 million people. LA County has 18 million people. So depending on where amongst the 18 million people you live, you're going to have a different experience. My in-laws, they lived in Sacramento, in the suburbs of Sacramento, which actually looks very much like Idaho. It's very white there. And so it's hard to take broad strokes of, well, if you move from this state to Idaho, then,
if you're trying to compare.
Right.
Because even comparing within California is its own thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So that's generally, it's, can I answer this question? And I think context matters. So I'm curious as to your caller, where in California is he from?
Yeah.
And how long has he been there? Has he moved around a bunch of different places? Because that really does make a difference.
Yeah. And then you mentioned something else, that statement of, if you want to find something, you can find it. Just talk about that.
Yeah. So I think first with the positive is we moved here not really knowing if we would be able to find good Korean food or good Chinese food, good tacos even.
Pause. That's the bad thing about living in a state that's not diverse, is that the food then is not typically that diverse.
This is my positive though, is that...
But you are finding something.
Yeah, so if you're looking enough for it, you will find it. Now, granted, you can't compare the food here versus the food in, let's say, LA.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't, we don't have enough
you have
volume
to
and diversity.
It's a loss.
Right.
You have to just cut your losses.
There are hidden gems, right? We found a great taco place, and it took us 3 or 4 different taco shops.
What's the name of it?
El Chavo.
Okay.
And
where are they?
They're on Overland. It's a tiny little food truck that's just permanently parked.
Okay.
And it's our favorite taco spot. And I would say it compares pretty closely to some of the better street tacos that we've had in LA. And so, again, if you're looking hard enough for it, you will find it, right?
So that's on the positive side.
That's on the positive side. Now, talking specifically with ethnic diversity and all that stuff, I feel like, whether you're in California, whether you live in LA, whether you live in Boise, if you're looking for any sort of racial discrimination or the negative impact of living in such a homogenous area, I feel like you can find that anywhere too. And you can find that here. That hasn't been our experience. We haven't had any run-ins. And that's not to say that other people who are Asian or other races that move to Boise will have a similar experience.
Yeah.
But again, our bent and what I teach my boys is...
Because you have...
I have two boys. Right? One in high school now. He's a freshman in high school.
Okay.
My youngest is in the 6th grade.
And I'm going to ask him about his boys because I'm curious what their experience is like going to public school and things like that. But we'll hit that later.
Yeah. And so what I tell them is if you go to school looking for it and expecting it, then any little thing that happens, you're gonna say, "Oh, it's because I'm not white or it's because I'm Asian."
Yeah.
And I just don't want them to grow up in a state of mind or just I think I don't want them to be handicapped by that thought.
Yeah.
Because again, I came to the States. I moved to LA when I was 8, and I was confronted by a
You
lot
moved
of
to
that
LA when you were 8 from?
from Korea.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was confronted by all of that, and yeah, there was plenty of just discrimination from kids being kids. I got into a lot of fights in elementary school.
You did?
I did, yeah, yeah. I learned Taekwondo in Korea, so I
And
thought
then-
like my flying kicks would just beat everybody, which wasn't the case. I got beat up a lot.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But-
such a different experience.
Right, but all that to say, we moved from a predominantly Hispanic area into a predominantly Hispanic area,
Okay.
and there was a ton of racism there.
So between you and Hispanics.
Right,
you-
right.
yeah,
And
growing up.
then we moved to a different area that was predominantly white, and we hardly had any sort of problems or issues. And
Yeah.
so, again, if there's always going to be bad actors, and that's just unfortunate. The reality of the just society today. But generally speaking, if I was looking for it, I think I would find it. But when we first came and visited, we first visited for one day, 24-hour just run through of Boise, my wife and I.
And were you kind of like held up in a car driving, or were you interacting with people during that time?
Doing everything. We said if we're going to
Like
consider
food,
moving
houses,
here, right?
culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So real estate agents and looking at houses and
Yeah.
visiting restaurants and just going down to the river, and everywhere we went, just people couldn't have been nicer. And we were like, what's wrong with just especially coming
So you're
from
saying
LA.
the culture that you were experiencing,
Yeah.
people are just a lot friendlier than what you had known in California.
It was unbelievably, it was a stark contrast.
Like they're
to-
going out of their way to say, "Hi, how you doing?"
Yeah,
Or
we
like,
went
"Oh, thanks
to
for coming in."
went to
And-
Wingers on I think it's on Eagle Road.
Yeah.
Just as we were driving around to go in for just a quick bite and a beer. And first the servers were just extremely nice. And then the restaurant manager comes by. And we're like, what's happening here? Why? Yeah. And then, so again,
Did the
if
TV
I'm-
cameras come out and they're like, you got punked? Or
right,
like
right.
Ashton Kutcher.
Again, if I'm looking for it, we're saying, is it because we're Asian? Like they're being extra nice to us because they think like we're foreigners here?
Yeah.
But no, people are just genuinely and sincerely nice. And it was hard to kind of grasp and understand what was happening. But I think that's just what happens if you live in a place like LA for so long, and people get a little jaded, sit in traffic for hours on end, and life just is kind of a grind. And it felt like that wasn't the case here. So we had a really pleasant 24 hours in Boise, which had a lot to do with how we ended up moving here 2 months later.
Yeah. You can get really entrenched in a culture and assume that's the norm, and it is very jarring to then go experience another state and those people.
That's right.
It's just it's fun and exciting,
Mhm.
and then it almost gives you a better light to see where you came from, and like, man, that's what these were the Benson, California.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
It is certainly eye-opening, and I think it's good. I think having done this, and we actually never thought we would leave California.
And none of your friends came with you, did you?
No,
Because you guys
no.
were all considering like Boise, Denver,
Austin, yeah, and Phoenix.
And did you have friends that you guys all separated?
Actually, a handful of families moved to Austin,
Okay.
and
Why didn't you go to Austin?
It's just too hot.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah, it is
and
hot.
again,
No,
coming
it gets
from-
hot here.
It does, but we have the seasons.
Yeah,
And we have snow, which is a really great change up for us, having seasons.
Yeah.
And the snow and the winters it's not terrible, right? It's not Chicago.
Yeah.
And so I think we get a little bit of everything here. So we've really just, we've really loved and enjoyed moving to Boise.
Perfect. All right, well, let's jump into it. Guys, I got 9 questions. We'll see how many are relevant and helpful to you guys. So first, how long have you lived in Idaho, and how has your experience been living here as an Asian family?
Yeah, 2 years. As an Asian family, what's funny is the first time we went to Costco,
Yeah.
we were like, oh, hey, I see another Asian couple over there. So in the stark, just the...
And then did
kind
you
of-
do anything about that?
No, because then
Okay.
it's like we're trying to make eye contact. Because, there's a certain, like, within, like, the Korean culture, like, if you see somebody that you just kind of give the nod.
Kind
And
of
so
like
we thought,
Jeep owners, like wave at Jeep owners. That's the only thing I can relate it to.
Right,
or,
right.
or motorcyclists
handshake.
always wave at
Right,
motorcyclists
right.
on the freeway.
Right, and so initially, because everyone around us was very white, So when you see some Asian couple, you're like, oh, are they going to try to make eye contact with us? So
Like,
we,
you're
we
Asian,
would
we're
look,
Asian.
nothing,
Okay.
nothing. Like no, and if you're here
And
long
that
enough,
made you think, like,
like,
oh,
it's
I
no
don't
big deal.
know. Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, so we had a good experience, and again, I think some of the most surprising experiences were how kind and friendly and sincerely nice people were. And one of the stories that I tell the most often when we go back to LA is we went to the DMV. If you go to the
Here, yeah, yeah.
DMV in LA, you just have to mentally prepare for just an unpleasant and just kind of soul sucking experience.
Yeah.
And so that's our context. We go to the DMV, and the woman could not have been just more warm and friendly and welcoming. Like, and she told me personally, she's like, "Oh, how long have you been here?" She's like, "Welcome to Idaho." She said that 3 times to me in a matter of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, this is weird.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
I gotta
right.
get out of here.
This is the DMV. Nobody loves the DMV. Yeah.
Oh. All right. What about when you guys ended up buying a home in Cuna?
Southwest Boise. Yeah.
Southwest Boise. Okay.
Yeah.
What was it like moving in? Like getting to know your neighbors, did you find that hard, challenging?
One of the
And this is like a general question. It has
Right,
nothing to do
right.
with necessarily the fact that
Yeah.
you guys are a minority, but
So in LA, we didn't really interact with neighbors. You don't. I feel like there's
because
not
the
really
culture
that
just wasn't
culture.
like that?
Right,
Okay.
right. And again, people are just kind of in the grind, so they're just always
going
coming.
to work, coming home,
coming
parking in the
home,
garage,
right.
shutting the door.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so we thought when you move to a slower paced place like Boise, Idaho, like the neighbors would bring casseroles over and all that my wife said, should we take cookies over to our
When
neighbors?
you moved in.
Right, right. And we moved, so a little additional context. We
Yeah.
moved December 2020, kind of at the peak of the pandemic.
Yep.
And so there's a little bit of just kind of closed offness from that. And then we
Yeah,
also
that's a tough
moved
time
in
to move. Yeah,
December, which is the start of our winter here. So we didn't really have, the red carpets and the fireworks didn't go off for us
Yeah.
when we moved in. We've gotten to know a few neighbors over time, but it hasn't, I would say that hasn't been a drastic change from life in California.
Okay.
Now, we hear from other folks at church that, they borrow stuff from their neighbors and stuff. And so we get a little envious of that because we don't have that kind of relationship. But
I wonder, I'm making a quick judgment here. Something I noticed, when we moved here, we moved to Eagle, and that's where we got a rental. And the way they design houses there is very like garage, the front door set back. And we would see people come home, they pull into their garage, they shut it. And I think a lot of them were I know some of them were transplants from California where they probably sold their house, they got toys. And I was like, and we don't even design houses that way anymore to be very forward facing or forward friendly.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. And that's exactly what we see is cars pull up the street, go into the garage closes.
Whereas we bought into an older neighborhood and it's not designed like that. And we did get jam and cookies from the older couple who's lived there their whole lives.
Oh man. Yeah.
And so I think it has to do with neighborhoods.
Yeah.
How many like are people anchored into that neighborhood, or is it a new neighborhood?
It is a
like
new
you guys
development.
moved into a neighborhood.
Right. And so homes
You
are designed to.
gotta, you gotta throw a block party.
I know we've thought about that. We've thought about doing like hot chocolate for Christmas season and all that, but then the holidays and so I think when it's a slower time of year, maybe we'll do something like that.
Would be good, like grilling a pig or something.
Good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about any challenges or barriers you face as a minority in Idaho?
Honestly, the biggest barrier and challenge is that we don't have a bigger Korean supermarket.
Okay.
We have so Diana's is the only just exclusively Korean supermarket.
Is that West Boise?
It's off of Fairview and 5 Mile. Kind of West Boise. It's almost like the size of a big liquor store.
Yeah.
So it's not like a full-on grocery store. So I think, all that to say, like when we go to LA or even when we drive to like Portland or Seattle, we actually will load up on groceries and bring it back.
Kind of like IKEA runs, but just grocery
And
runs.
IKEA is another one too.
I
But I think, challenges outside of that, again, food is a big part of kind of the just everyday life in LA.
Yeah.
And there's Thai town, there's Koreatown, there's Little Tokyo, there's
in LA.
Yeah. And there's Little Ethiopia. Like you can find really, really just good food even within the diversity that's offered there. And here it's kind of, one or two little hidden gems that you have to go really search and dig deep to find.
Yeah.
So we do miss the food the most. But in terms of just, us as Asians or being Korean, we've not encountered anything. I think more of it is just you're used to seeing a lot more diversity. So when you come here, and we visited a number of different churches,
Yeah.
and so you kind of walk in with a little bit of reservation, like, oh, is it going to feel different when I walk into a group setting where, whether it's a classroom or a church,
Yeah.
where it's predominantly white?
Mm-hmm.
And so we visited 5 churches before we ended up at Table Rock, and it was never, just not even a shred of just feeling that sense.
At any of the churches you visited?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And so, again, if I wanted to nitpick and look for it, I think I could find it. But, I think the sense of reservation is normal just going into any new setting. And so whether, you started a new company, you probably have that same reservation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's anything that we can speak to directly about, well, it was because we were Asian, we felt this. We didn't experience any of that.
Great. How have you found the community in Idaho to be in terms of welcoming diversity and inclusivity?
So I would say the first thing that comes to mind is we've loved introducing people at our church to Korean food. And, there's, to our surprise, there's a pretty decent Korean barbecue spot here, but there's only
Just
one.
down the road.
No, that's the fried chicken.
Oh, okay.
And then that's the other surprise. Bigger surprise is that there's 2 Korean fried chicken places in Boise. One that's in Garden City now.
Yeah.
And so then,
Go ahead.
and the one up the street is literally like a quarter mile from church, and most of the people at church had never even seen it or
You're the
gone
one
to
that's
it.
been trying to get us to go there.
Yeah,
We haven't
yeah,
found it.
and it's delightful to take somebody new who's not had something as tasty as Korean fried chicken, and to see their experience. And so I think in terms of inclusivity and embracing, again, like, it's a new culture, and no one has said like, oh, you speak English really well, like, those types of things that, like, I think are a little cringy.
Yeah.
But in terms of adopting and really just being or embracing the culture that we bring, our small group and friends from church that have come over and hung out with us enough, we use a lot of Korean words at our house for like mom and dad and things like that, and they actually pick up on it, and they will start to use those words. One of the kids started using one of the just words for older brother that my youngest calls Jonah, my oldest, and he said, what is that word? And then he started calling his older brother that. And so
What is it?
It's hyung.
Hyung?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think it's been really kind of fun to watch that.
Yeah.
So it's the delight of being able to share our Korean food, whatever limited access that we have here. And again, we didn't come here expecting or just, I think the word inclusivity is such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And, we didn't expect to be treated any differently, and we're not treated any differently, right? And so that's, I guess, if that's inclusivity to you, where people accept you and things are fine, and regardless of, the skin color that you're wearing, and I guess that's been our experience, that it's no different.
Great. Have you found resources or support systems within the Asian community in Idaho?
No, I would say we don't necessarily, we're not looking for it.
Yeah.
We don't need it. We joke. So Jonah also took Taekwondo. He was actually finished as a black belt. Jonah's our oldest son. And so every time we drive by a Taekwondo studio here, we say, hey, Jonah, you should go teach there. And that would be, the Korean community. I think one funny coincidence is that there is a Korean language school in Boise, and they want to rent space from our church.
Yeah.
And so I was a part of a phone call where they were asking a bunch of questions and stuff, and just really funny that these pockets of Koreans or just any ethnic groups exist wherever you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, we haven't felt like we have to go seek out a Korean church or a Korean community, and I think if you need that and you want to find it, I think it's here. But it hasn't been on the radar for us.
So when you guys moved here, what was it like? Like you've shared a lot of your experience and some of your kids' experience, but for your children, did you have concerns about them pulling them out of California where you grew up
Yeah, yeah.
and bringing them here?
So our concern was, so additional context in LA, our kids were part of a full immersion dual language program.
Okay.
That was our neighborhood school. It's a public school system.
Yeah.
Where the entire curriculum from K through 7th or 8th is taught half in English and half in Korean.
Okay.
So just because of the draw of that type of a program, most of the kids in that class are going to be Korean.
Yeah.
We lived in and this is interesting kind of side note, but we lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. So
where were you in Cali?
Glendale.
Okay.
So Glendale, by census standards or census count, is mostly white.
Yeah.
But if you peel back that layer, that first layer, then white counts Armenians, who are Eastern European,
Okay.
as white.
Gotcha.
And so
So
we
you're saying
lived.
it's more diverse than the
Right.
numbers are pointing
And so
at.
there is a far greater Armenian influence in the Glendale area, and anyone from that area would wholeheartedly agree. And so while on paper you say, oh, it's a mostly white neighborhood, no, it's mostly Armenians. And so we lived in a predominantly Armenian neighborhood. Kids went to school with mostly Armenian kids, but they were this like pocket of Korean students amongst what would be a predominantly Armenian school. And so thinking about then how did they transition from that type of environment or those types of just kind of race backgrounds to then moving to a mostly white area with mostly white classmates. I did worry a little bit about like, would that impact them in any differently than how it was in Glendale? And I don't think it's any different,
Okay.
right? Because wherever you are, it's just, you're going to have a majority of some type of ethnic makeup.
Yeah.
And that's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. I was surprised to find that there's a lot of refugees that live here. So there's, even in our neighborhood, there's, I think, different places in Africa. And so then a lot of those kids ended up in my kids' classes. And so I think there's some relief that they weren't the only minority. But again, I Jonah, my oldest, had just no issues at school. Joshua, my youngest, had some issues at school, but he is also a little bit more spirited, if I want to put it in a positive way. And so knowing that that's his personal, his personality.
Yeah.
Is it because he's Korean that he got into trouble and had run-ins with kids, or is it just his personality? Yeah, and
His dad's a fighter, so
not a very
stories. Tell him all those flying kick stories.
Right, not a very good one because I was on the ground a lot more than I was just winning these fights.
Yeah. All right. Tell me, are there any recommendations you have for other minority families considering moving to Idaho? What would you say to them?
I would say
to the guy who called and he's like, "Can I move there?
Yeah.
Is it going to be good?
Come visit. The thing about again, I don't know what neighborhood he lives in.
Yeah.
Right. If he lives in Arcadia, he's amongst just all Chinese people, or if he's in La Crescenta, La Cañada, he's amongst mostly Korean people. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right. So I think he should come visit and spend at least 24, 48 hours here and see what he sees. And I think, again, if you're looking for it, you'll always find it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what his personal background is. Somebody who came from just a really just kind of racially charged environment might not do well here because you're always looking for it, or you just have a lot of baggage from those past experiences. My wife and we've had those experiences, but I think by God's grace, it doesn't hold us just thinking about those things all the time. So I think, again, everybody's experience is different. And another Korean person's experience here from California, from Southern California, may be completely different than our experience. So it's really hard to say. So I would say come visit, spend a few days here. And, there's plenty of direct flights now. Even from Burbank Airport, there's a couple airlines that fly direct now. So it's cheap enough, and you'll see how when you get here, you can breathe. It's a breath of fresh air, and I think that alone is enough to sell most people in California to a place like Boise.
Hey friends, I hope that interview was helpful to you guys. If you're considering moving to Idaho and you have questions about this, or you're curious about what it's like to relocate here, please give me a call, shoot me a text, or drop me an email. I would love to be your guide in that transition. With that being said, if you're enjoying this channel and you want to see more stuff about the Idaho Boise real estate market or what it's like to live here, then do subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when I post new content to help you guys in your journey. And finally, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching, liking, and subscribing, and I'll see you all in the next video.